On the night of September 14, 1994, Carol and Maddox sat in courtroom 7 of the Harlan County Courthouse in Harlan, Kentucky, and voted to convict a man she believed had nearly killed her, while the person who actually did it watched from the jury box, 12 feet to her left, and said nothing. By the time you finish watching this video, you'll understand how a broken investigation, a coerced identification, and one catastrophic failure of the justice system allowed a predator to do it again. And you'll understand why the woman who survived him was, in a very real sense, put back in the room with her attacker, this time by the state. To understand how something this grotesque was even possible, you have to go back to the summer of 1993. Harlan, Kentucky, is not a city that forgives easily. It sits deep in the Cumberland Mountains, the kind of place where the hills press in close enough that the sky looks smaller than it should. The economy had been bleeding out for years, the coal industry gutting itself, storefronts along Central Street emptying one by one. People stayed because their families had always stayed. That was the logic. You didn't leave Harlan. Harlan left you slowly. Carol and Maddox was 26 years old that summer, working double shifts at the Mountain View Diner on East Cumberland Avenue. People who knew her described a woman who carried herself quietly, not shy exactly, but careful. She had brown hair she kept pulled back while she worked, and she smelled like coffee and the faint chemical sweetness of the diner's industrial dish soap. She rented a one-bedroom apartment on Ivy Street, drove a rusted 1988 Civic that took 3 tries to start in the cold, and called her mother in Benham every Sunday without fail. She was the kind of person a town like Harlan barely notices, which meant nobody was watching when the wrong person started to. The attack happened on the evening of July 29, 1993. Carol had closed the diner at 10, walked to her car in the lot behind the building, and that was the last ordinary moment of her life for a very long time. What followed, the assault, the hours she spent unable to speak or move, the way she eventually made it to a neighbor's porch bleeding from a wound above her left eye, is documented in the Harlan County Sheriff's Office report number 93-0441. Reading that report now, what strikes you is how clinical the language is. How completely it fails to account for what it costs a person to survive something like that. Investigators arrived. Photographs were taken. A rape kit was processed, though the results would take months to come back. And by then the case had already been tilted in a direction it couldn't recover from. Detective Ray Coulter, 17 years on the force and due to retire the following spring, was assigned as lead. And it was Coulter who, within 48 hours, decided he already knew who he was looking for. His name was Dennis Farrell Pruitt, 51 years old, a drifter with 2 prior convictions for breaking and entering in Bell County, and a history that looked good on paper if what you needed was a clean arrest. Pruitt had been picked up on an unrelated trespassing charge 3 days before the attack and was sitting in the county jail during the assault, a fact that was technically in the system, technically accessible, and somehow never checked. Or never checked carefully enough. That particular detail, that quiet, administrative failure, is what broke Carol and Maddox's life in two. Coulter brought her in for a lineup on August 6th. She was still on pain medication. She was still sleeping with the light on. The report notes that she was in the room for 11 minutes before she pointed to photograph 4. Photograph 4 was Dennis Farrell Pruitt. What no one told Carol and Maddox that day, what no one apparently thought to verify before putting that lineup in front of a traumatized woman on painkillers, was that Dennis Farrell Pruitt had a verified alibi, 3 witnesses, and a booking timestamp that put him in a holding cell 12 miles away when she was being attacked. The prosecution knew this before the trial began. They went ahead anyway. They went ahead anyway. Let that sit for a moment. Because the prosecution, specifically Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney Gerald Baines, 38 years old, 12 months from an election he desperately needed to win, had in his possession before opening statements a document that confirmed Dennis Farrell Pruitt could not have committed the assault on Carol and Maddox. The booking timestamp, the 3 witness affidavits, a note from a corrections officer who had personally logged Pruitt into the holding cell at 8:47 p.m. on July 29, 1993, 40 minutes before Carol and ever made it to her neighbor's porch. That document existed. It was in the file. Gerald Baines had read it, annealed it, and placed it behind a tab marked background. Not disclosure, not exculpatory, just background, and he had moved forward. The trial opened on September 6, 1994, In courtroom 7 of the Harlan County Courthouse, Dennis Farrell Pruitt sat at the defense table with a court-appointed attorney named Wallace Greer, who had been licensed for 11 months and had never tried a felony case. Greer filed 2 pretrial motions. Both were denied. He did not subpoena the corrections officer. He did not independently verify the alibi witnesses' statements. He did not, by any account, review the booking timestamp with the same scrutiny it deserved. Later, when all of this unraveled, Greer would say he had been overwhelmed. That word, overwhelmed, would become one of the most quietly damning words in the entire case file. Carol and Maddox testified on the 3rd day of trial. She sat in the witness box in a blue cardigan she'd borrowed from her mother, and she pointed across the courtroom at Dennis Farrell Pruitt and told the jury that she was certain. That was the word she used. Certain. She said she had seen his face in the parking lot light before everything went dark, and that she had not forgotten it, and that she was certain. And she believed that, fully, completely, with everything she had left, because nobody had told her there was any reason not to. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 20 minutes. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Dennis Farrell Pruitt was sentenced to 22 years in Kentucky State Penitentiary. He was taken from the courtroom in handcuffs, and Carol and Maddox watched him go, and for the first time in over a year she slept through the night without the light on. She thought it was over. But here is the detail that changes everything, the one that, even now, is almost impossible to process if you sit with it long enough. Among the 12 jurors who deliberated that day, who voted unanimously to convict Dennis Farrell Pruitt, who shook hands in the hallway afterward and drove home to their families, one of them had been on the jury for a reason that had nothing to do with civic duty. His name was Raymond Earl Cutler, 44 years old. He worked a maintenance route for a commercial cleaning company that serviced several buildings along East Cumberland Avenue, including the strip of businesses 2 blocks from the Mountain View Diner. He drove a gray 1991 Ford Ranger with a cracked taillight on the passenger side. He had no prior convictions, not one, not even a traffic violation, which meant he sailed through the voir dire process without a single flag. He answered the juror questionnaire in careful, legible handwriting. He said he had no connection to the case. He said he could be impartial. He was seated as juror number 9. Raymond Earl Cutler had been in that parking lot on East Cumberland Avenue on the night of July 29, 1993. He knew exactly who Carol and Maddox was. He had known from the moment her name appeared on the witness list. He had known when she walked into the courtroom in her borrowed blue cardigan. He had known when she pointed across the room at another man and said the word certain. And he had said nothing. He had sat 12 feet to her left and said absolutely nothing for 9 days, and then he had voted to convict the wrong man. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what Raymond Earl Cutler did the moment that verdict came down, and he understood, with total clarity, that he was free. Because Dennis Farrell Pruitt wasn't the only person Raymond Earl Cutler had been watching. He had been watching Carol and Maddox since the first day of trial, studying her routine, the blue cardigan, the way she left the courthouse each evening and walked to her mother's car parked on Ivy Street, the way she thanked the bailiff by name, the small, careful habits of a woman who had survived something terrible and was trying, piece